Thank you. So welcome again to the sixth Accelerating Climate Resilience Speaker Series event. Today we have some very bright young talent on the panel, so I'm excited to share with you as well. Just a little bit about this program, generously supported by the Bar Foundation. This Accelerating Climate Resilience grant programs aims to support communities in the MAPC region to implement innovative strategies that help advance their community's climate resilience and then collectively for the region as well. And part of that, this program, we hope to have a platform for communities to share challenges as well as opportunities and lesson learned and experience, so that collectively the region can enhance our climate resilience. And part of that, we also have the speaker series, which we have been bringing in kind of experts and leaders, as well as practitioners from across the country, internationally as well, to talk about various topics intersecting with the climate issues, in housing, thinking about climate justice, and arts as well, in a variety of different ways. And so today, I'm very happy to introduce Pooja, Danielle, and Simone, our next generation climate activist champions. And so in our work, we often talk about whose voice we need to hear from, who else should be at the table for planning, for understanding decision-making processes and things like that. We have heard, like I said, from leaders across the country, practitioners, researchers, and also within the grant programs, our municipal leaders have been kind of having this conversation as well. So today, like I said, I'm glad to have these young climate champions in the room to share with us. And of course, they do a lot of work on the ground as well, and they are full of bright ideas, I'm sure. So I hope they can share their perspectives and their work with us, with how we practitioners and kind of environmental advocates in the community can learn from them, what we can do to support their work, as well as how, in thinking about opportunities that we can all collaborate together as well. Because I think climate future is their future. And so it's time we listen and also have their, participate alongside with them. So with that, let me actually introduce our speaker. Simone Colburn is a junior at the Cambridge Latin School and is the co-founder of the youth-led climate education organization called Spring Forward. Spring Forward works with schools and youth programs to implement more than 25 climate workshops to teach students about the inherent intersectional nature and the climate crisis, and also bring about how students can make systemic change. So Spring Forward has taught over 100 lessons, reaching for more than 1,500 students to date. And then I also have Daniela Kunkel-Linares. Apologies if I messed up your last name again. She's a youth organizer at the Climate Generation with the youth environmental activists in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She believes in a radically loving and caring climate movement, which is led by young people and our Indigenous relatives. She does this work to stand in solidarity with those who are brave enough to imagine a better future. Last but not least, Pooja Tilvawala. She is a youth engagement manager at the Climate Initiative. She also works part-time as the executive director of the Youth Climate Collaborative, which she founded in November 2020 with support from the Climate Initiative. Her latest project is a podcast, Dare to Envision. She is active in networks and program, including Yango, did I say that right, Pooja? which is the official youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Coalition Wild, and Aspen Institute's Future Leaders Climate Summit. Her purpose, Pooja's purpose in life, is to nurture her curiosity and creativity, encourage herself and others to challenge the status quo, and unite people to improve the quality of life for all. So very, very talented group. And so with that, I will start with Simone.
All right, thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I'm a junior at Cambridge Trinity Line School in Massachusetts. I'm involved in a lot of different climate activism. So I was a coordinator in the Sunrise Movement, Boston Hub, coordinator in Fridays for Future Massachusetts, and Boston Climate Strike. But I'm mainly going to talk about my work as the co-founder of Spring Forward. So you can go to the next slide. Yeah, just to go over it again, Spring Forward is a youth-led climate education organization, which I started with friends that I made through climate activism in the spring of 2020. And we really saw the need for more climate education, and more climate education specifically on the inherent intersectionality of the climate crisis rather than just around nature and animals. And then also on how students can make systemic change rather than just changing habits regarding their personal sustainability. So we made a lot of workshops, and then we go into schools and camps and after schools and lead them. And yeah, I think it's been really great so far. You can go to the next slide again. I want to talk about why I started Spring Forward and how it goes back to my experience with climate education in my elementary school and middle school and even through my high school. And then what I think climate education should look like and how Spring Forward is addressing this. So you can go to the next slide again. Yeah, as I said earlier, I go to Cambridge Public Schools and I have since kindergarten. If you don't know, most people would consider Cambridge Public Schools to be pretty progressive. But the climate education my peers and I were getting was pretty much solely on personal sustainability. So turning off the lights, throwing out your trash, using the back of the paper. I think we're all pretty familiar with this. And then also on how animals are affected, asking questions like what's happening to the polar bears, and then on nature, what's happening to these beautiful landscapes. And while many people think this is helpful for younger kids, and maybe it can be, it is dangerous because then when I went on to middle school and really started learning about what climate change is, my foundation was still based on animals and personal sustainability in nature and not so much on people and communities. So only later when I learned about the real effects of climate change and climate inequity did I start getting more concerned about the crisis and more involved in climate activism. But still at that point, my peers had this idea still that climate change is, the same thing as a little bit of litter on the sidewalk. So they weren't very concerned about it and didn't really understand why I was doing the work I'm doing. And I think a lot of even my friends and peers still don't fully understand it. So seeing this misconception of the climate crisis in my friends was really my big motivator for starting Spring Forward. Then yeah, you can go to the next slide. So just to re-say it, my climate education, most of current climate education framed around the effects on nature and animals and has that emphasis on personal sustainability. You can go to the next slide. Still, I do want to say that climate change is about nature, right? And I do think understanding nature can help, and appreciating nature can help understand the climate crisis. Ever since I was little, I would go on walks and hikes with my family all the time. And I do think that getting out of the city and being in nature helped me see that we as humans are connected to nature. But I think the issue is that this link is often missed. So climate change harming nature isn't then in climate education in schools, for example, is not then linked back to the effects on people and communities. And yeah, you can go to the next slide. So again, really showing what's happening with nature can be fine, but then connecting it back to unequal effects on communities and then having that emphasis on systemic change. And when I say that, I mean trying to, as an individual, push change in our system. So push change in making legislation, and thinking about corporations and not placing the blame on the individual. You can go to the next slide. And Spring Forward is doing a lot of work addressing this. We've made partnerships with a lot of different schools and camps and after schools. So over the past almost 2 years now, Spring Forward has led over 100 workshops, reaching over 1,500 students. And really, climate education is so important because without knowing the causes of climate change, we can't know how to stop it. And without knowing the effects and the scale of the crisis, we don't know what scale action needs to be taken at. So I think climate education really connects back directly to the main questions we're addressing in this webinar. So yeah, that's about me. And I unfortunately will have to leave this webinar early because I have work, but my team member from Spring Forward will be coming on really soon to answer any questions you have. She's awesome. She's been involved since the beginning. And yeah, she's now a coordinator of media, but has done basically everything. But I'll also put my contact information in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Simone. That was really nice to hear and eye-opening. All right, next up I have Daniela. Why don't you share with us about your perspective and experience in your work?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Daniela. I don't have a presentation, to be completely honest. Things in Minneapolis are crazy right now. We have teachers on strike for 13 days now. And so there's just so much going on. But I'm really excited to be here. It's always really exciting to get to connect with other youth and to just see spaces where youth are being prioritized and where youth voices are at the forefront. So yeah, a little bit about me. I recently graduated from the University of Minnesota. I never thought I was going to do climate work. This is not something I expected to be into and something to be so passionate about. But as a first generation, like Peruvian American, I grew up going on trips to Peru and seeing the devastating effects of climate change in the global South and seeing how drastically different that was from like what I experienced here in Minnesota and growing up here. And that's something that's just like always been on my mind, but I never really knew what to do about it. And I started my youth work journey by doing anti-racism work around education. And that's what I thought I was always going to do, is that I was going to be an educator. I was going to work on making schools better and more anti-racist or abolitionist schools. And so I started working with students in my hometown doing that kind of work. Then all of a sudden, I heard about this pipeline being built in northern Minnesota, going through Indigenous territories. And then all of a sudden I was on the front lines of that fight, and I was up at line 3 fighting this pipeline. And I saw for the first time youth really come together in a really powerful way, not only to like fight the pipeline, but also to build community with each other, to show up for each other continuously. And that really motivated me to get involved in climate work and in climate justice. And that's when I heard about Climate Generation and their youth program, which is the Youth Environmental Activists. I heard about it from one of the students that I work with in my hometown. She's a part of it. And I knew right away that it was something that I wanted to be involved with. And luckily they were hiring, and now I get to work with this amazing group of students. So yeah, Minnesota is a group of high schoolers across the state of Minnesota. Most of them are in the metro, just working together and meeting to talk about different actions that they want to take regarding climate justice. So one of the big things that the students are working on right now is a climate justice education bill. And kind of as Simone was explaining, like, our students really recognize that the education that they're getting around climate justice right now is not enough, if anything at all. Most students that we talk to, like, don't have a grasp of how climate change is affecting them right now, when it's very evident if you look at things that it is affecting them. And so the students are working to, they've written a bill and they got their first hearing a couple of weeks ago, which was really exciting, to require climate justice education to be taught at our high schools and to pour resources into finding materials that teachers can use to do that work. Our students also put on a yearly climate summit where they bring together high schoolers from across the country, and sometimes we have some international participants, putting on different workshops about climate education topics. And that's where we get really intersectional with things when we talk about like disability justice and the climate movement, queerness and the climate movement, and racial justice and the climate movement. It's really empowering to see how young people are able to like draw these connections, and not only do that, but like educate and talk to people about it and have really nuanced conversations that, quite frankly, I don't see adults always have. And then kind of finally, like, our other big thing is just like financially supporting young people. We, and I also really believe, like, if you are going to ask young people to do work, like, they deserve financial compensation. And so what that looks like is providing stipends for our students who are most involved, but then also providing like micro grants for students who want to do their own climate projects. So we had like a group of students who are creating a garden this year at their school. And so like providing them the money to like buy their seeds and do the work for that is really important for us to make sure that young people feel empowered to take action and to take action on their own. And I think thinking about like the topic of this conversation about resiliency, I think I really do dream of a world where young people do not need to be so resilient. There is so much being thrown at young people. There are so many issues that are being thrown at young people to solve. And I just hope that one day there's a world where young people don't have to be so resilient, that they can be a little bit more messy, that they can be young and that they can figure things out and that they don't need to have all these answers. But I think what does give young people our resiliency is our ability to choose hope and to be hopeful. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to say, I was thinking a lot about a quote from Miriam Kaba, who's an abolitionist. And she has this mantra that hope is a discipline. And I just want to read you something that she had said. She says, it's work to be hopeful. It's not like a fuzzy feeling, like you have to actually put in energy, time, and you have to be clear-eyed, and you have to hold fast to having a vision. It's a hard thing to maintain, but it matters to have it, to believe that it's possible to change the world. So I think, like, honestly, like today, I don't feel really hopeful. Like, I had a 4-hour shift of watching students at a district building who are occupying it for standing up for their teachers. I don't feel really hopeful that young people are being listened to. And it's sometimes I don't feel it in my body or in my heart, but it's something that I choose. And it's something that I see young people choose every day, is to be hopeful and to stay steadfast to their time, investing their energy and their values into believing that there's a better world out there. And so I'm reminded, especially on a day like today, where I'm tired and not feeling very hopeful, that hope is a discipline, and that as young people, we're always holding on to that hope of that discipline of hope, honestly, better than like anyone else I've seen. And I'm also thinking a lot about what it means for municipal leaders to show up for young people. And as I'm talking super locally to like what's going on right now in Minneapolis, there were 8 high schoolers that occupied a district building last night in support of the teachers who've been on strike for 13 days now. And time again, we hear these commitments from municipal leaders to young people. And time again, we see their failures. We hear their commitments to young people in providing safe and stable schools, but we have students out of school for almost 3 weeks now. And so I think to empower young people, we need to have them in schools, because that's one of the first places that young people experience community and can work to build their movements. And so I think it's really important for municipal leaders to be critically in community with young people. Every single person should be concerned with the well-being of young people, not just youth workers, not just teachers. Every single person, young people are a part of our community. And I just think that it ultimately requires a lot of interrogation by municipal leaders, by adults, of our own views on what young people are capable of. In order to really start showing up for young people, it takes a lot of self-introspection to do that. So that's what I'll say for now. I could go on for hours, but I will hand it over to Pooja.
Thank you, Daniela. That's very insightful. And we'll have more questions and discussions around those issues a little bit more after this. So I'll turn it over to Pooja.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and start presenting. Thank you all for organizing this event and for having me here today. So I wear many different hats, one of them being as the Youth Engagement Manager at the Climate Initiative, others being as the founder and director of Youth Climate Collaborative, which actually started thanks to funding from the Climate Initiative. And then some of the other things that have already been shared. So I wanted to begin by showing some pictures that I took while at COP26 in Glasgow this year. So you see a combination of people inside the venue and outside the venue marching on the streets, 2 different strategies used to mobilize youth, to bring youth into decision-making and negotiating spaces, and to create change ultimately. Here you see 2 leaders who are showing the connections between climate and racial justice. And you see everybody else marching along with them, singing with them to show solidarity for racial and environmental justice. And then other young leaders around them. This is just another picture. I think it's really powerful to see this kind of action on the streets. See this little boy over here. There were so many little kids out protesting as well. Now, this slide intentionally has many, many words on it. So I wanted to discuss some challenges and barriers that young people face in the climate space. Don't worry, you don't have to look at this long list. I've broken it down to 2. So one of them is financial need and limited resources. So as Daniela was saying earlier as well, there are a lot of unpaid jobs, internships, and even from grants that young leaders or informal youth groups receive. Informal meaning they're not registered charities or 501c3s. There's a lot of requirements around the grants that are received, or they're very short term or low amount. So like 5K, 1K, 500, which is still good, but to start a whole organization, obviously $1,000 is not enough. And then there's a lot of unpaid jobs and internships as well in the nonprofit sector. For some reason in our society, there's like this thinking that's unhealthy that these kinds of jobs should be, unpaid or paid less than like private sector or other. And it's like, how do we shift this thinking, this narrative, and thereby open doors for youth who are unable to take part if it is unpaid? One of my friends has actually started an initiative called Pay Our Interns, and they've gotten a lot more paid internships on the Hill, which I don't know if you all knew this, but even internships with congressional members were unpaid, and it's really unfair because it's like crazy hours on top of school. So another thing is emotional challenges like burnout, eco-anxiety, climate grief, and even bravery, like mentioned in Danielle's introduction, actually, about the bravery needed to imagine. That's a big step. That's actually why I started my podcast, Dare to Envision. It's about it's stories of unheard youth who have had the bravery to envision a better world and taken steps to make that vision a reality. And how do we get other young leaders to also do the same and have that courage to take the first step? So by sharing stories of youth that are in similar circumstances, I'm hoping that will motivate them. Then there's also difficulty in finding like-minded people and a community to do action with instead of doing it alone. For example, one of our ambassadors for TCI is based in Chicago, and she was having a hard time just within her own school, like approaching other kids to do activities together, but she didn't want to do it alone. And so with the ambassador program, that gives her a space to connect with like-minded youth so that she can it's just so that she doesn't have to do this stuff alone. And so having programs that allow for community building is a really effective way to help with this. But then there's the problem of, how do they learn about this? And so this also comes down to the lack of mentorship or mentors or network in trying to get involved, right? If you don't know, like, let's say you're interested in getting involved in climate change, but you have no one, like your parents don't know much about it, your immediate circle of friends, your teachers may not know how to get involved. So then who do you turn to when you're a young person? And so that's another struggle that's faced. And then, yeah, mentorship goes a long way, especially depending on where you live, where you're from. You might be steered towards a certain direction, whereas if you had a mentor, you would perhaps choose a different life path or something, or even get guidance on how to implement community projects and turn your idea into, an org or a well-functioning project that is scalable. Then let's see, I'll go to the next slide. So with Youngo, the youth constituency that I'm part of for UNFCCC, one of our biggest issues here is that even though we had tickets to enter COP26, we were at the venue, but we didn't have access to a lot of the negotiating rooms, or we were limited to 2 minutes for youth input commentary at the end of the session. And if the session ran over, then that time would get cut, not just for youth constituency, but for the women constituency, indigenous groups, all that. So that's a huge problem as well. So how and when would our voices get heard if those opportunities are cut, or if we're not even let in those specific doors while at the venue? And then another one is, and then with decision-making tables, this could also mean like at the municipality level, at within your own environmental entity, creating a structure for youth to get involved in decision-making, whether it means adding at least 2 board member seats for youth and treating them as actual board members instead of like a little side group that doesn't have voting power. There's also, I just learned this week that there's like 5 or 6 states where if you're under 18, you're not allowed to have voting power if you're on a board. So that's something that could be great for youth to mobilize around and change in those states. I just learned this, but that now is like on my mind, has been on my mind since I learned it. And then another one is low diversity in mainstream narratives. So this, like when I say diversity here, I mean diversity in experience, diversity in like where you're from, like if you're from Nebraska or New York, then also racial diversity and whose stories are heard, right? And who's telling your story? Are you telling your story? Do you have the platform to tell your story? Is anybody helping you get your story out there? So trying to think of ways for us to create these opportunities for young folks is really important. Then another one is equating of less experience as incapability or doubting of skills. So a lot of the time, people will look at somebody young, like I'm 26, I've seen young leaders who are like 13, 15, 17 in this movement, right? And they honestly know what they're doing, when it comes to either growing a social media following to get their voice heard, or, creating programs that pull in youth, draw in youth into this movement, or evoke certain feelings out of the general population. Like, people know what they're doing. And I think that just because there may not be the years of experience due to age, it should not, create this doubt. Give folks a chance first. Then there's low diversity in the field. This, I think everybody knows, and it's no secret. Not a lot of women in leadership, not a lot of people of color in leadership. And, that needs to change. That really does need to change, because you miss out on, a huge range of experience and perspective when you have like the same kind of people again and again in leadership. Then there's lack of opportunities to gain relevant knowledge and skills. Another one that I think is a big missed opportunity is that in school, obviously teachers already have a lot to teach, and educators do too, but showing like the career pathways that can come out of a certain subject, I think is crucial, especially when people don't realize that they can earn a living working on climate change, environmental justice, the energy transition. If they don't know that they can earn a living on this, they don't know what careers are out there that they can pursue, then it's very discouraging to want to study those subjects in, in higher learning, if higher learning is pursued. So making it clear through education what the career pathways are is super important. And then another thing with job description is showing the connection between the job and social change, or what the overall mission is, because nowadays people are really looking to join an entity, organization that they fully support and want to be part of. Then let's see. I'll say two more. So description of climate change as a problem of future generations. Like, I think this is problematic, especially if you go into the certain communities in the US or internationally. Like, people are feeling climate change now. We can't keep describing it as a future issue. I feel like this is like a broken record statement, but still I keep hearing it, and hopefully it changes. And then when you go internationally or to certain parts of the US, you also see like internet, computer, phone access issues, language barriers. There's an org called Climate Cardinals that's working to translate climate docs. And you see like the UN and others doing this too. Before I continue, do I have a little bit of time, you think? Is that okay? Or what do you want me to do?
1 more minute.
One more minute? Okay.
Yeah.
I have a lot of slides. I only went through 2 slides out of like 10, but I'll skip a bunch. So this is kind of like the climate initiatives trajectory and stuff. I'll just highlight some resources we have. We have learning labs. So we aim to educate, empower, and activate youth, and we're trying to create a cohesive youth voice, first in the US and then globally, to feel empowered to take action. And so some resources we have are learning labs, our Beautiful Planet videos. Then we recently did a climate policy institute to give the opportunity to youth to speak with their like with congressional staff. Then we have this Emerging Leaders Council and Next Gen board members to bring youth into decision making. Climate Courage workshops to help youth exchange strategies for coping with some of the emotional challenges of working in this space. And then with my own org, Youth Climate Collaborative, So I do the climate courage workshops, and then the podcast I talked about. I want to start these roundtables among philanthropies, NGOs, governments, young leaders to help transform youth resourcing and funding. Yeah, and then there's other stuff. And then also check out the American University workforce papers as part of this workforce. It's for getting youth to join environmental orgs at the federal level and stuff. And yeah, definitely check out these resources. If the slides can be shared later, let me know and I can send them to you.
Yeah, definitely would love to have that. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, so before I open up to for questions from the audience, please add your questions, anything that you want to share or say to the panelists in the chat, and then we'll start collecting that information and share with the panelists. Before I do turn to questions, Daniela, Pooja, and I think Annie, the co-founder of Spring Forward, is here in place of Simone too. Do you have questions for each other? I think this is a great opportunity to connect you all from very different places across the country, and so I also want to give a moment for you all to ask each other questions.
I'll bite. Pooja, I was just thinking about kind of like what you were saying about how like people are facing climate change right now. And I think a lot of times in like white audiences, we talk about how like climate change is something we're gonna experience in 10 years or whatever. But like having family in the global south, like there are people experiencing this right now. And I think that's also something when people say like young people are our future, like young people exist right now. And they deserve to be listened to right now and not just whatever they might bring in the future. And so I'm wondering like if you have any insight or thoughts on like how do we change people's mindset about like to who and like when climate change is going to happen. And I have some of my own thoughts, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, my initial answer is just to like shut it down whenever somebody mentions it, right? So just invite, like, ask probing or challenging questions. If somebody says, you know, this is a problem for the future generations, you can say, oh, how come? Did you know that climate change is happening here and here right now? These are the effects being felt. So, and then also educating them about the harm of that narrative and spreading that narrative.
Any thought on that, Annie? I know it was to Pooja, but also see if you want to share your thought.
I'll just, yeah, I think that's like, I think like the biggest thing is like something I've like gotten into is like being a part of climate generation is like climate stories and everyone sharing like everyone has an experience with climate change, like believe it or not. And so getting to hear a real person experiences of climate change and how almost every single person has a story of how they've experienced climate change in different parts of the world is just something that I think can be really helpful in disrupting that thought and that pattern of thought.
Yeah, sorry, I was having an issue with my mute button, but I definitely agree that I've had so many conversations with adults saying, wow, you're doing such amazing work. Like, we really appreciate you, taking this on. And I guess that's kind of demotivating in a way, because I am passionate about climate education, not because I feel that it's been dumped on me, but because I want to be a part of the solution. And I guess to be made to feel burdened with this responsibility and to feel very alone in taking it on is quite intimidating and doesn't make me really want to continue with that work, which is not their intention at all, but it is frustrating. So I definitely agree that we need to be having more conversations and pushing back against that kind of way of thinking.
We have a question from the audience. I think this is really great and fun one, I think. Really powerful and inspiring presentation from all of you, and Simone from the Spring Forward, but we have Annie here now too. If each of you had 3 wishes that would make your work journey easier moving forward, what would those be? Who wants to start? Maybe I'll start with, I'm just gonna pick. You want to start with Pooja?
Sure. So, gosh, I'll just say the first things that popped in my head. Just mind you, if I had more time, my answers may be different. The first thing that came to my head, honestly, was more women presidents or leaders in the world. I think there would be a lot more peace, and then that would also open up more funding for like things that really matter, like you know, climate change being one. And then, okay, another thing that I wish for, I wish that everybody had access to quality internet around the world, in the digital space, since we are such a globally connected world. Often, like, I was just doing a podcast episode with somebody in Liberia. He had to have his video off the whole time just for us to like hear each other. And so there's like deep bandwidth issues, and that makes it challenging for their stories to be heard, for us to, tie the faces with the stories. And so that's another thing. A third thing, having more, like what I talked about earlier with transforming how the funding and resourcing works for youth. I'd like to see that.
Thank you. Annie? Oh, let's go to Daniela first. I think she's having issues. Oh.
Should I go?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry, I don't know why that keeps happening. I think the first thing is climate education in classrooms, because I don't think we talk about it enough in school, like everyone's already said. Also, a big thing for me is approaching the climate crisis with kind of an intersectional mindset, because I think so often when we approach different issues in our society, we think about it as very singular and like isolated from other social justice issues, but it is a social justice issue. We don't think of climate change as being that, but it really is. So I think thinking about how it pertains to different communities and thinking about inequities that exist as a result of climate change, as opposed to just thinking about it scientifically, because I see a lot of that. I wrote it down. Also, I think approaching climate change as a systemic issue as opposed to kind of approaching it on an individual level. Because when we talk about climate action, it's usually like recycle or, turn off the lights and turn off the tap or whatever. And those things are great, but I think it's good to zoom out a little bit and think about long-lasting, more meaningful action that we can take.
Thank you, Annie. Daniela?
Yeah, I'm gonna dream big.
That's right.
I think that like it would be so helpful if like adults and really investigated their own prejudices that they have against young people. It's so interesting to me that we were all young ones and we all experienced the oppression of being young, and then like somehow everyone forgets it, I feel like, and then is just cool with like having prejudice against young people when we all experienced it as young people. So I think like that would be so helpful if adults could take time to really think about like how they interact with young people, the autonomy that they think young people have, and decision-making skills that they think young people have. And with that, I think like another big wish is like if everyone saw young people as truly like invaluable members of their community. I think a lot of times we see young people as parts of their parents or parts of their caregivers, and we don't see them as their whole selves. And like that is really detrimental to the beautiful impact that young people can have in our communities. And then another big dream is it would be so helpful if we could get to a root understanding that the root of climate change is capitalism and colonization. We would not have the climate crisis that we have now had colonization not happened. And that land back is going to be the answer to climate change, that we need to give our land back to Indigenous people.
Thank you. We have another question. What social platforms are the best form of communication for youth groups to share ongoing initiatives? Like,
I'll say that this depends on where the youth are located. But just from like the statistics we get, a lot of people are joining things from their phone a lot more than computers. So like Instagram, super effective for, and it also depends on what, right? So like for raising awareness, Instagram is great, I think, at the top for young folks. And then for like webinars and such, I think like Zoom works. Twitter space is gaining momentum in some African countries. But here, not really. Then Instagram lives. And then sharing on YouTube is still good because it's still shared. It's easily shareable everywhere for videos. Yeah, do others want? Oh, and then for Twitter for like policy related tweets is effective.
Anyone else? Okay, this next question, I know Daniela, you mentioned, I think in the moment right now, it may feel very challenging and hard to feel hopeful, but I want to remind all three of you actually, and all the youths out there, that you are doing such amazing work, so much, and and self-care is also much important to make sure that you're you have the endurance and that you can continue the work well into the future as well. But take a step back and just think of all the great work that you've done too. I do want to ask a question, and I'm combining this with one in the audience as well. It's like, what are you hopeful about, like a bigger picture? What do you see as hopeful, especially with the great work that all of you are doing now into the future? And then a question from the audience, as the second part is, if how or what would you like to hear from an adult or older person that would add to your effort of hope? Like, any taker?
I just spoke, so Daniela or Annie, do you want to go first? Are you trying to unmute Annie? I can see you like chuckling.
Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Maybe don't mute anymore, Annie.
Okay, I'll just stand muted. So I think a few months ago we led a teacher training, and that spring forward we led a training with teachers. I think it was elementary teachers and middle school teachers, and that was just, I think that was amazing to see so many people showing up and so many people wanting to learn how to kind of integrate climate education into school curricula. And I think it was just exciting to see people listening and showing up and wanting to hear what we had to say. So I just think seeing more of that would be amazing. I'm just like a willingness to learn, because I know sometimes there's a hesitancy to let us be the teachers because it feels counterintuitive, but we do know a lot and we do have a lot to say and a lot that we want to share. So
Yeah, I think I'll kind of echo what Annie's saying. I think like showing up to things like this, like obviously you showed up because you're like, I want to know what these young people have to say, and that is so meaningful. I think like, yeah, I think like honestly just like continuing to show up for young people. I think like even myself as like an older young person, like I'm gonna mess up. I'm not gonna be the perfect ally for young people, but like I'm gonna keep showing up and I'm gonna keep trying and I'm gonna apologize when I mess up and I'm gonna figure out how to do it better. And I think that's the thing. It's really hard to take your ego out of it, but that's how you keep showing up for young people, is by like just doing it and knowing you're gonna mess up, but being okay with that.
And I would just add, so the question was how or what would you like to hear from an adult or older person? I would say collaborate with us, collaborate with me, come here, come collaborate with us. You may have more access to funding sources, opportunities, decision-making spaces. And if you could open the door for youth who may not be privy or have access to these opportunities that you do, then that would go a long way. And it would show that you're not just here to listen, but you're here to work with us. There's a difference, you know? Listening is one thing, collecting input, feedback is one thing, having roundtables where you offer a seat, you listen, and then you take it back to your team to implement, that's one thing. But, you know, having us there to work with you side by side throughout from the onset till finish is much more effective. And that doesn't just go for youth, you know, that goes for any time you're trying to implement a program in a community that, you know, you didn't grow up in, that you're not part of. It's a new community for you. You need to build that trust. This is how you build that trust, in my opinion.
Really great. We are coming up on time, so I want thank you to all the audience for the questions. I know we're not touching all of them, and I will share some of the questions. Some of them I think we can talk for hours too afterward, but I'll share with the panelists, and maybe you can kind of craft something, and we will share back to the group if that's okay at a later time. But I do want to leave a few moments for kind of for you to have your final words in terms of you know, anything else that we have talked about, you know, your fellow panelists have talked about, just kind of your last statement before we end the session. Who wants to start? Maybe I'll start with Daniela. I don't know.
Sure. What do I want to say? I guess like, I'll say that like, I think the, you know, like the first and most intuitive step of like making your spaces accessible to young people is realizing what young people's needs are. And a lot of times, like, if you are going to have like a role for young people that does not have a stipend or food or transportation provided, you are probably going to get like only white students to do that. And if you really want a diversity of students in being involved in your municipality or whatever it is, like you need to make those things accessible to all young people. And that means providing stipends, or like when I was really starting my youth work, I had no money, and the only thing I could offer was like a single slice of pizza for students. And that like just showing that like you are trying with what you have, I think is the biggest way. Like young people can feel that effort, and that genuine effort goes a long way. But I think in the long run, like how are you building trust with them? You shouldn't automatically expect trust from young people just because you're an adult. And we need to build trust with young people, and we need to show them respect and autonomy. So how can we start with a slice of pizza and build it up to trust that allows young people to show you what they need in a bigger, deeper way, and allows you to continue to show up for them? Yeah, I think that's what I'll say.
That's great. Thank you. Pooja?
Yeah, I was just reading through the questions. To answer your question, Lindsay, I would say mentorship for those with careers, right, that are addressing this. Approach colleges, high schools in your community and say, hey, I work in this field. Would you want me to come as a guest speaker at some time? Like build those connections. And then also like colleges will have where you can speak with like somebody who works at the EPA, somebody who works at XYZ, and tell them about your job, your career path. You can organize one-on-one interviews with students. So working with the career centers. And then the other, sorry, I just wanted to get to some people's questions. For getting youth input in how communities are developed going forward. So there was just the US National Climate Assessment, and they had these a couple of events at night where they invited community members to give public feedback and input on the reports before that they write them. So doing that for like community development plans from the onset is good. I will try to answer more questions here. I'm going to add my presentation link to the chat.
Yeah, and we can share
yeah.
the questions with you at later time too, just for the interest of time. We'll wrap it up. And Annie, last but not least.
Was it just to pick any question from the chat?
No, just more of like your any last thing that you want to share, your
Okay.
thoughts, closing statement to share with the audience.
Yeah, I see a question about climate anxiety, and I just did want to say, because that's something that has affected me a lot. So I think it's a nice thing to end on. I think it's great that we're kind of acknowledging the toll that seeing all this information in the news every day and just constantly being bombarded with can take on you. But I do have a lot of hope, and I think I'm a part of a really great community of young people, and specifically in Spring Forward, you kind of find that like support system. So I think finding support systems like that to kind of help you through the stress and kind of how overwhelming that can feel, kind of having people in your life to help you navigate through that. So that's just kind of something that's important to me. So I felt the need to say that. So yeah.
No, thank you for sharing. Thank you again. So with that, huge thanks to you, Pooja, Danielle, and Annie for joining today and for sharing your thoughts, your perspectives, and the work that you're doing. Really, really great work. And I think we have heard a lot from you, your insight, so that we should really bring that back to, those notes and really think about how to be better and more effective at building trust with our local youth and including be more inclusive in the work that you do in your future in our planning and decision-making process going forward. So thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining today. If you have questions, feel free to send them to me as well. I will collect them and I'll share with Annie, Simone, Pooja, and Daniela. And in a few days, I hope we will also have a version of this recorded session and a copy of the presentation on our website as well. So thank you. Have a great evening. Take care.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Van.
Thank you.